And we are live. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova, your host, and I'm joined by a backup computer over there. It's just me tonight, unless Emery Moyna is able to join or someone else. Emery has been fighting the flu, and I kind of wore out his voice yesterday. He was generous with his time while he's taking a semester break from graduate school. So tonight we'll be talking about a lot of variety of topics that's on my heart. One reason I have the backup computer over here is every now and then this one goes kind of flaky. So now when you're looking at the background back here, that's obviously a green screen. I'm inside a cubby hole in my house because it's so cold here in Northern Virginia, and it's just nice to concentrate the heat in one room rather than heating the rest of the house, which for the most part I don't occupy during the winter months anyway. So Andrew Kaufman is here. Sunday nights I expect we may not have a large viewership, but greetings to everyone that's joining us live and also via recording. I'm going to have some administrative things just to open up, kind of boring stuff. I will cover a variety of topics. It'll be tedious, but it's just on my heart. Many of you know this channel is not really organized that much for entertainment. We try to add a little entertainment just to lighten things up, but it's for the most part kind of the tedious, boring research and review of evidence and reasons, much like detectives trying to reconstruct history. So let's see what's first on the docket here. I'd like one of the commenters here, and he commented in the comment section of one of the videos, so this is public knowledge. He was thanking me for offering prayers for his mother, and she may be going through some tests, and it could be some painful tests, and really just in general, without needlessly going into the specifics, it's a family member that just needs prayer. And I've appreciated getting emails from people asking me to pray for them, and I felt it'd be just right to announce that. And there are needs throughout this community that comes here to this channel on a regular basis. And Tony Maurice, greetings. And I think we'll lift them up in prayer. So let's get this stream off on the right note. I'm just going to offer a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, thy will be done, Lord, on earth as it is in heaven. You've commanded us to pray always so that we may have strength to endure and stand before the Son of Man someday. And Lord, there are needs. There are broken hearts and broken bodies. We lift up Schneule, who was so open and transparent as to confess a need for healing in his mother, and we lift that up. There are other needs, Lord, and spiritual, economic, and we do live in fearful times. But we commit this stream and everything else we do to you in Jesus' name. Amen. And Andrew Graham is here. Andrew Graham. Greetings. Greetings. So greetings to my internet family. And so that was the first thing on the docket. I'd like to also thank the patrons who have been so generous. We somehow found the PayPal account in the banner title of the channel page, but I provided it in the video description. I want to thank all the patrons who've been so generous, above and beyond what I would expect, and that motivates me to try to do a good job on these streams. Again, for me, a good job is being accurate technically, not necessarily being an entertainer. I mean, I love to entertain, but it's also a hard job, and maybe I just don't want to compete in that space. I was somewhat of an entertainer because I had you could see that grand piano back there. I used to play concert level piano, and I love playing. Now I don't have a real grand piano. That's obviously just a virtual background picture. But boy, I have played on them, and it's like power steering. So again, thank you to all the patrons who have supported this channel and given me a lot more incentive to just keep plugging along. Many of the viewers here, many of the subscribers, I would say about at least 30 or 40% of the subscribers to this channel actually came here because of my announcements regarding McLean Bible Church. That was not meant to be the primary mission of the channel, but I ended up getting a very large subscriber base just because of the things going on at McLean. Let me just offer this, and there's some links there. David Platt has been writing a book and encouraging people to give up the American dream and all the comforts of life. And you could see what speaking fees he's charging, and I don't know how many times he goes on a speaking engagement and doesn't preach on Sunday morning like he was hired to do in McLean Bible. He'll just go off on a speaking engagement, accept $10,000 to $20,000 for to maybe speak not even half a day, and he may be giving speeches on how we need to sell all we have and stop living the American dream and go out there and preach the gospel. So I have to challenge him that this is, oh my goodness, Nagu Aziz, greetings. So that looks really kind of not exactly practicing what you preach. And there have been some people that have adopted what he's said to do, and it's ruined them economically. And so there's an interesting case here. According to the church constitution, are we allowed to criticize leadership for being incompetent and corrupt, in our opinion? If this could lead to some very interesting legal situations if they say, no, you have to assent to everything we say, even if you think it's corrupt and incompetent. And I will point out, if there's a link there to the SaveMcLeanBible.org. Let me just show something here. Let's see if I can. Okay, let me share my screen here. This is the attendance history of McLean Bible over about a 61 year period. And you could see what happened when David Platt became pastor. And now he's accepting speaking fees on how to run the Christian life, how to evangelize. And there's a group of us that says he's got to go. This is not a healthy situation. It's a very bad business decision for a church that took 61 years to build up, and now we've lost 80% of the congregation. So I've been trespassed, that is threatened with arrest and jail, and I wasn't really given any good reason except that my observed behavior, which is vague, it can mean anything. If my observed behavior is that I'm complaining that the present leadership is demonstrably or arguably the cause of this disaster in a church attendance, then that will raise interesting constitutional and legal issues. And suffice to say, that's going to be interesting. But I want to point out something that is probably on the darker side. They are claiming, according to their budgetary reports, to be getting this, maintaining almost the same level year over year revenues despite this 80% drop in brick and mortar attendance. Now, if that looks suspicious to you, whether there's some creative accounting or maybe not the most, say, straightforward, or it could be misleading accounting, and or there is someone throwing a lot of money at this for not really clear reasons, throwing money at a dying church. This raises all sorts of questions, and there has been government money that has been either loaned or given to MBC, and we don't know if it's being misappropriated. We don't know the salary of David Platt. It could be anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 a year, in addition to his $20,000 speaking fees, and we don't know how many speaking engagements he has a year. But I just want to point out, and I'm saying this to the elders, here's a question: has MBC gone full woke yet? Not quite, but recently, Associate Pastor Eric Saunders got called out for saying, when he was talking about transgenderism and talking about gender dysphoria, he said Jesus had dysphoria. And I think that was an extremely poor choice of words, given the context of what he was talking about. And it's making the Twitter universe now, and also Facebook and the blogs, is just not, conservatives were not, suffice to say, we're not very happy about that. But I want to point out, for the elders at McLean who might be listening to this, and you were the ones who signed off on me being threatened with arrest and jail, I got to point out something for you guys. You're not supposedly doing this for any pay. You're in a volunteer position. I'm going to suggest you demand that the chief financial officer give you access to the books. You need to know some questions of what's going on. Do you really know? I'm not saying you even tell me, but if they refuse, if David Platt and Wade Burnett and Larry Cooper and Bill Steele refuse to give you the books, I suggest you threaten your resignation, because you don't want to be implicated if there is a civil count of fraud, and God forbid a criminal count of fraud. The IRS or any other government authority talking about misappropriation, and there are all sorts of legal things going down. Do you want to be associated with it? Seriously, this isn't a playground, guys. I'm trying to just encourage you and say, you know, you may be playing with fire by assenting to the current leadership. And I want to point out, is this an illustration of competence? Do you want to defend leadership that has done this to a thriving church? Do you want to continue to be a part of that? And they've been trying to pin this disaster on a small group of people in the church that would include me. And I think it's rather evident, given that I didn't join this kind of move to vote the leadership out until June 30th, that I had nothing to do, virtually nothing to do with the disasters that's going on. It had everything to do with David Platt coming on board and doing all sorts of things. We have Associate Pastor at McLean Bible Church saying it's difficult for him not to torch all white people, especially white evangelicals and Christians. And then another associate pastor saying Jesus has dysphoria. Don't pin that on me or my friends at McLean. And if you feel that you're going to subject me to church discipline for exercising my church constitutional rights, because members of the church are part of the leadership, they have votes. There's going to be some constitutional issues here. I'll announce also that there are, because a Christian mother in front of her children, a beautiful young Christian mother in front of her children was threatened with arrest and jail by McLean Armed Security and Fairfax County Police. This is rubbing a lot of people wrong, and you got even more departures from the church. Why was that done? Just because she was asking some pointed questions about finances and contracts being signed. This is not right, and people are seeing it. And so you elders, I think a lot of you guys were well-meaning, but I want you to look at this and tell me, do you want to be associated with this crew? And if they're doing some, God forbid, dirty dealings, even if ultimately the courts find them innocent of any criminal wrongdoing, do you want to go be dragged in the mud through all of that? I'm just pointing that out. It's not worth the cost, brothers. This is a sinking ship. People have asked, am I trying to help install new leadership? It's like, yeah. Do I want my friends to become captain of the Titanic right after it hit the iceberg? This is a terrible situation. No matter what happens, the carnage is there. And I was laughing with some friends recently. I said, what happened to our parking ministry? Parking lots are empty. The church sanctuary is just like an empty cave now, if you go to the Tyson's campus. So, all right, enough of that. We're gonna just move on. We'll just move on. That was really for the McLean Bible Church crowd that are about half of my subscriber base now, which wasn't exactly what I expected to happen, but I'm grateful for you all being subscribers. And one of them is right here. So God bless you, Nagwa. So now we're going to start trying to move to other topics. I have an appearance on, let me see if I could put this up, on the NonSequitur channel. Now, the NonSequitur channel once had a debate between Kent Hovind and Aaron Ra, and they said we had 500,000 viewers. 500,000 viewers. So let me show the screen for this. Tomorrow, I'll be on the show, even though it doesn't mention my name. I was invited to this show. It's going to be a hostile crowd. Hostile is in hostile against Christians and creationists. But I got invited, and every now and then I feel it's important for me to just show up in a hostile environment, just to show that I'm willing to face them and face my critics. But here on this channel, I do ban lots of people that I feel are being very trollish. And so they'll be talking about teaching children creationism. And then, so that is tomorrow. Now, technically the time is what, 8 p.m. tomorrow? That time has been bumped around. So the link to that event is in the video description. But then on, let me see, there's another event. Dr. Dan, many of you know him. He's an evolutionary biologist and a professor of biology at Rutgers University. He has invited me to an Ask Me Anything event. And I'm not going to try to, embarrass him or anything. I want to have a working relationship with Dr. Dan, because it's like, okay, I know you and I disagree. He's been very generous to review a lot of my writings and materials and say, okay, Sal, that's right, that's right, that's right. I totally disagree with that, okay, and that's fine. And when I do try to say, okay, I will point out where a professor of biology will say, no, I don't agree with that characterization of evolutionary theory. And I want to give both sides. Why do I give both sides? It's been, a lot of the youth are leaving the Christian church, especially after they go off to college. And I had a discussion yesterday. I said, okay, how do you raise Christian children? Do you just try to indoctrinate them and insulate them from any challenges to their faith while they're growing up? You know that that may seem nice and happy when they're at home, but then they go off to college their first semester, or they leave home at some point in their life. They get exposed to other ideas, they get challenged, and then they're totally defenseless. They don't know how to, you know, they don't know how to deal with it because they're used to an environment where they weren't being challenged. And I think it's important at some point, and this is subject to figuring out, because I don't know at what age we start to tell them other people disagree with your views. And they can have some really pointed questions for you. And I've said, isn't it better that they be exposed to it while they're in a Christian home, rather than the first time that they ever hear it is when they're out of the Christian home? And I talked to Nathaniel Jeanson, who is a Harvard-trained PhD, and he's a young Earth creationist. How did that happen? And I said, Nathaniel, you went into a really hostile environment being at Harvard University. You were studying biology, you're a stem cell researcher, you got your PhD there. How did you not lose your faith? What was important? How were you raised? And he said he heard both sides of the story. He heard both sides of the argument growing up. Now, he didn't tell me at what age his parents were doing this. So by way of extension, I think it's really important that I get editorial feedback from people like Dr. Dan, who's an evolutionary biologist, to tell me, okay, Sal, this is where I disagree and the reasons why. And I'm very happy to pass it on. And especially, I may make commentary or whatever. Sometimes I'll say that's actually good, and sometimes I'll just say, well, I think I made a better argument. But I would rather that people hear both sides, because what happens, let's say hypothetically we have this young person go off to school and all they've known is the Christian doctrines. They've never been challenged. And let's say, for example, they were actually taught wrong by, like, say, Kent Hovind. They'll feel, when they go off to school and they realize, oh, engaging this is not as easy as I thought, When you see Kent Hovind or other people, YouTube personalities, arguing this in an hour show, you think it's going to be a cakewalk. You think it's going to be a playground. Then you go off to school and you're in a biochemistry class. You're in a biology class. You're in a cell biology class. You're in a molecular biology class. You're in a microbiology class. You're taking evolutionary biology. Is that 1 hour of seeing a debate gonna win the day for you in school? I don't think so, and especially if the science is a little bit on the shaky side. So I'm just saying that being able to maintain your Christian faith in the battleground of modern academia, and even outside of academia, let's just say the working world, it's going to be challenging. It's not going to be a playground. And sometimes when I see these debates and Christians going to it to get their, try to strengthen their faith, which is a noble thing to try to strengthen your faith, I'm just like, you're kind of getting fourth grade level, infant level nutrition. You need heavier nutrition to get you through. So, that's what this channel tries to do in terms of at least what I say, but also more importantly, I try to point you to really good resources like Rob Stadler, Change Tan, John Sanford, and many more. So, yes, Jamie Russell, greetings. Yeah, I'm going on with McCrae tomorrow, and I will be commenting on the curriculum. And you may be surprised. If a curriculum is not scientific, I will be very, very critical of it, because you do not serve Christians well by giving them things that no one believes. Not, if top-tier creationists will read that curriculum and cringe, that's not good. And so that might be my role. They might then ask me, Sal, do you think it's right to be teaching kids young Earth creationism? I'll say yes. They might ask me why. But I will say this is not the right way to teach it. And I also do believe that at some point a Christian should learn something about evolutionary theory. When I worked for a creationist geneticist, young earth creationist, retired Cornell professor, at the time he wasn't even retired, he was a courtesy associate professor. He didn't send me to Dinosaur Adventureland to learn biology. He sent me to the NIH. He sent me to learn and study under evolutionary biologists. He didn't worry that I was going to lose my faith in creationism in the process. And I will say I actually got strengthened in my belief in the process. Sometimes you have to face, Jordan Peterson says, sometimes you have to face the thing you fear. That's always healthy for you. However it turns out, if you know you have to face something and you don't, you're going to be lesser for it. But if you know you have to face something and you face it, so psychologically it just helps everyone. So, Janet Duttridge, God bless you. Great to see you. So it's going to be interesting if they start challenging me on that. On, you know, they might say, okay, great, Sal, you're disagreeing with this curriculum. But then they'll say, well, what about everything else? Or are you going to say evolutionary theory is wrong? I'm going to say yes. And I happen to study under evolutionary biologists. And the more that I've studied it, it's worse. I think it would be a disgrace to teach that to kids. And maybe Steve McRae might invite me to do an entire talk on why I'm a young earth creationist. Why I'm first an ID proponent, then a young earth creationist. When I became a Christian, I was raised in a Roman Catholic home, so I learned about the gospel. I do believe that my real conversion was at age 15, reading the New Testament. I was for a while a theistic evolutionist. So I'd accepted evolution as a kid. But then I began to look at the problem of the origin of life, and I said, there's a miracle there. And by way of extension, it's like, well, you know, where did the miracle stop? There may not be any need for evolution at all. If God will create the first life in a cell, he could create the first life as a fully formed human being. And I was an old earth creationist for about 20 years after that. And then I began to consider young earth creationism. I went to graduate school in applied physics at Johns Hopkins. And part of that curriculum, even though it's an applied physics degree, I took an elective in cosmology. And after I took that cosmology class, I got even more convinced that the young earth creationist model is viable. Because when I saw some of the craziness in Big Bang cosmology, I said, I thought young earth creationism was outrageous. When I saw like the inflation theory and stuff about dark matter and et cetera, I just like, okay, it's a level playing field now. Yuck is no more outrageous than inflation theory, and certainly no more outrageous than multiverse theory, which is something fashionable. So tomorrow Steve McRae, and then on Tuesday it's Dr. Dan, and I provided a link there. It'll be Ask Me Anything, and out of courtesy to Dr. Dan, I told him, you know, my goal isn't to try to my goal is not to try to embarrass him or anything, or to try to win a debate, and I think he knows that. I said, Dr. Dan, you know, my goal is, let's try to make this show, let me try to ask questions that would be valuable for both sides. That's fair. I'm not gonna, you know, let's see if everyone can come out of this exchange feeling that they got something. And I said, I have no problem telling you what my questions are in advance. So one of them, I'm just going to ask it, and I have no idea how he's going to respond. He did tell me he had a creationist student in his introductory biology class. And that's kind of interesting. I got the impression that he's going to treat them like any other student. And you know, as long as the student answers the questions that he teaches, that's fine. And so, like, you know, as a creationist, when I took biology and I was asked questions about evolution, I give the answer the professor was expecting. I didn't consider it a confession of faith. You know, when I was taking some literature classes and talking about characters, like in classical literature, like say the Greek gods, and I had to answer questions about the Greek gods and what they did and who they were. I'm just like, it's not a profession of faith that when I answer the question that I actually believe that they existed, but I had to demonstrate that I understood what was taught to me. And I actually did ask a professor, I said, you know, do you have a problem with me giving an answer to a test question about something I totally don't believe? He said, no, but, you know, he said, I have to give you a grade. And I'll give even something not quite as, say, metaphysically or theologically loaded. Because I had a background in physics before I took biology, I knew a lot more about the definition of thermodynamic entropy. In a lot of chemistry textbooks, and partly, unfortunately, because of some unfortunate comments by the founders like Boltzmann and Gibbs, entropy has been said to be a measure of order and disorder. The modern view is that that's a terrible way of framing it. And there are several counterexamples to using that definition. And I've even asked textbook authors, and one of them, Larry Moran, said, no, entropy is not a measure of order or disorder, but we used it anyway in our textbook. And I'm like, so I was taking an exam question, and it was like a true false. Is entropy a measure of order or disorder? And I said, yes. Even though I knew that was false, but I knew that's what the professor was expecting. So, you know, some people may have a problem with that. And, you know, I encourage you to do what you feel led of the Lord to do according to your conscience. But if I were a teacher, like, say, teaching Christian theology to a non-Christian, I would not expect him to consider whatever he wrote to my test questions to be a profession of faith. I would, however, want him to articulate what he was taught in class and in the textbooks. It doesn't mean that I expect him to believe it. So what I'm going to ask Dr. Dan, is it possible a Christian young earth creationist can succeed in certain scientific disciplines, even biology disciplines? Just going to ask that. And I'll throw this out at you. At George Mason University, where I graduated, and some of you have seen Professor David McQueen. He's a professor. My undergrad was at George Mason. My graduate degree was at Johns Hopkins and the FAS Graduate School at NIH. At George Mason, we had at least 3 PhDs in biology who were young earth creationists. They are awarded PhDs in biology, and they were young earth creationists. They could tell you the standard evolutionary talking points. So by any measure, I would say, seems to me, you could succeed. Change Laura Tan has been on this channel. She is a University of Pennsylvania, Harvard-trained PhD professor in molecular cell biology. And she teaches at a secular school. She is a young earth creationist. Rob Stadler's a young earth creationist. He got a PhD in Harvard, MIT in biomedical engineering. And millions of people are living and thriving because his invention, his medical device inventions, are implanted in their bodies. So I'm just going to point that out to Dr. Dan and say, do you agree with that? You know, I think that's a fair question. And I think that would mean a lot to the young earth creationists here thinking about going off to be medical doctors or biomedical engineers, or I wouldn't say college professors, because academia is kind of hostile to Christians right now. And yesterday we said, you know, it's not so much creationism anymore that'll get you in trouble. It might be your unwillingness to use certain pronouns. Seriously. So that's one of the questions. The other question is I'm going to ask Dr. Dan about the adequacy of Darwinian evolution, because there's this thing called the third way of evolution. And let me see if I see it here. And there are other theories of evolution that are not Darwinian. There are all sorts of modes of non-Darwinian evolution that have been proposed, varying degrees of acceptance, but I'll show you, let me show you a diagram of just some of them. We talked about Richard Sternberg yesterday. He is not a Darwinian. I'm pretty sure he believes in common descent. He's very, very friendly to intelligent design, and he's what we would call a process structuralist. And so here, if I could show this, we have Darwinian evolution, which is sometimes, you know, the modern form is what they call modern synthesis or neo-Darwinism, but there are all sorts of others. They have the mutationist school, which is coming back a little bit because of Masatoshi Nei. Richard Sternberg is a process structuralist. Then we have all sorts of theistic evolutionists, and I'm not going to get into all the fine points because I think they're all wrong. It's not worth my time. It's not worth my time to, investigate the fine details because there's so much in biology. So Dr. Dan, those are, I want to be fair to you and give you a chance to, I'm not trying to give you a gotcha question. I think those are legitimate because where I'm headed with that is, you can probably guess. So I'll just leave it at that. And we'll just see how it goes tomorrow. Dr. Dan said, by all means, promote the Ask Me Anything on Tuesday. And then tomorrow I'll be on Steve McCrae's show. That's going to be interesting. Dapper Dino, I think, is going to be helping host, and same with Daivd Neff. So the usual suspects will be gathered together, and that's going to be fun. So let's see what's on the docket. And oh, by the way, Janet, we opened the show with praying for people, and I will continue to pray for you. I know a lot of people know your story, and you're on my heart a lot. So God bless you. There are any number of needs in my family. There's been a death in the family. Someone that was very close to my mom, and so there's a lot going on in everyone's life. And as far as this thing about evolution, you know what I tell people, Christians thinking about, they're wrestling with issues, I'll tell them, there's no salvation in the name of Charles Darwin. There is no salvation in the name of Charles Darwin. There is no hope for your soul in evolutionary theory. The Christian creationism does offer something. That's something to consider. And people say, well, you don't have any absolute proof. And I'll say, you don't have any absolute proof of abiogenesis. You don't have any absolute proof of evolutionary theory. You're going to throw away maybe the chance of eternal life on something you can't yourself prove. And there is tons of stuff that I will share, that I've shared on this channel, that says, guys, it doesn't even look like a good scientific theory. Maybe you should reconsider, because what if there's a chance this is designed? So that's what I see. These people demanding absolute proof, they never practice it in their own life. They make decisions about how to live their lives based on something they have very shaky evidence for. And despite their claims that they have overwhelming evidence, when challenged, it's like they have none. And, there's some people say, oh, look, the answer's in atheism. I'll say, what answers does atheism have? How do you find meaning in life? How do you value what's good and bad, et cetera, et cetera? And it's like, what proof do you have that your decisions are right in the ultimate sense? So just throwing that out there, guys. All right, so the next appearance, another appearance that's coming up in only goodness, 13 days, maybe not even, almost just 12 days. The Discovery Institute Faith and Science Conference. In one of the, let me see, I'm talking Faith and Science. The link should be in, you can Google for it. You can Google for it, and I'll show you what it is. I'm sorry I forgot to include the exact link, but you could see it here. Here it is. Okay, I have it. I have it now. I'll be at the Dallas Conference on Faith and Science, the January 22nd in Denton, Texas. That's also where the Institute of Creation Research is based, and then I also have some people I'm going to meet there. And also along the way, there are all these researchers on the path through Tennessee Valley. I might get to see Joe DeWeese and some of my co-authors on papers, and who knows? I might even run into John Maddox if he's still around. So we don't know. One of the people here in the side chat, you might see him occasionally. He said publicly on side chat he's planning to go, and that was Matt S. So I'm not disclosing his real name though, but he did. What I'm saying is he himself disclosed it here on the side chat under his internet handle. So at least one person that's been watching this is we're going to be able to hang out. So I just thought I'd point that out. There'll be a lot of my colleagues will be the featured speaker. And something else to mention, some of the presentations here that I give are sometimes just dress rehearsals for me for presentations I give in private. So there are Zoom groups where we have Christian faculty that are faculty either at Christian or secular universities, but they're leaning toward intelligent design. And there are a variety of other groups hosted by a variety of people and organizations, and I've had the privilege of speaking at those. So some of the material you hear me share here is either a dress rehearsal or kind of a summary of what I presented to them. So when I talk about presentations given in private meetings made public, that's what I meant when you saw that in the video description. And Janet says here, amen, Sal, they just think their evidence is superior. Yeah, they got an attitude. They don't like being challenged. But you know, I've decided I'm not going to be in the business of trying to. There's a saying, don't try to fix stupid. And when I call willfully stupid, I'm just not going to try, because they'll resent it, and it just ends up being a waste of time. There's a proverb that says, correct a fool and he'll hate you. Correct a fool and he'll hate you. And there are people that, as my arguments got better, meaning I'd gone to school, I studied more biology, I studied physics, I was able to put more and more things on the table. They just hated it. I thought they'd be happy that I learned something. They actually resented it. I just wanted to point that out. Okay, let's see what else is on the docket. So those were most of the admin stuff. All right, so now we go into the just for fun phase. If people were curious, whether you're curious or not, I actually have YouTube channels. I don't spend a lot of time on Creationist YouTube channels watching their content. And that's partly because I think the best content is here, technically. So what YouTube channels do I visit? Many people know I was in the aerospace and defense industry for about 20 years. So it's no surprise a lot of my favorite YouTube channels are like Ward Carroll. He was a F-14 radar intercept officer, fighter pilot, paper skies, dark skies, growling Sidewinder, and their naval things like Drachinifel. I can't pronounce the name. It's a history, military naval history, and then the Silent Service series, which is a dramatization of the U.S. submarine force in the Pacific during World War II. Now, I provided in the link, I can't show it, we don't have the time to show it here, about the supersonic booze carrier. It's about a Russian airplane that used the equivalent, that used vodka for their air conditioning system. So Russian vodka is like 40% alcohol, 60% water. It's a very simple formula. Well, the air conditioner on the supersonic bomber utilized a mixture like that. It's just pretty much equivalent to Russian vodka. And you can imagine how this this fact could be abused. And so they called the supersonic bomber, I think it's the Tupolev 22, they called it the booze carrier. And so you had all these pilots and ground crew. After the plane landed, they'd be kind of like, quote unquote, doing their maintenance jobs on that, and you know, sometimes they drain the fluid that is not needed. And of course, you had all these guys with their jugs or whatever, or sometimes they had water heating bottles, and these guys actually looked a little bit pregnant because they'd be filling these water heating bottles with all the vodka and then taking it home. I just thought that was so funny. The way the guy who runs that, that's Paper Skies, and I provided a link, he's just really humorous because he has this Russian accent and he's so acquainted with Russian culture. It was just fun, fun aviation anecdote. I also, when I was growing up, I was fascinated by airplanes and submarines. Oh boy, I love submarines. But I have a little funny story I'm just going to read, just in the interest of maybe a little bit of lightheartedness. The German U-boats in World War II did not have a very good toilet system. There are all sorts of difficulties when submarines emerge. You have to use a lot of pressure to pump stuff out. And the German engineers were more interested in making a killer machine. You know, they weren't really interested in quote unquote creature comforts and conveniences. So let me read a little bit about, I'm not going to read the whole article, let me share a little bit about what they did, about life on this. And there was one time flushing a toilet actually sunk a submarine. The waste can't be flushed directly into the ocean because of external pressure will make it travel the other way. Yuck. Spare a thought for the person who discovered that law of physics. The waste is usually sent into a holding tank and disposed of later. So there's a picture of the submarine there. They call the toilet a head because it's at the front of the ship, at the head part of the ship, because that's where they get really good wind, and they can have odors kind of dispersed that way. So let me just read this. Toilets on ships have been called heads for several hundred years. The word comes from the location of the crapper in the bow or head of the sailing ships. Ships cannot sail directly into the wind, so the bow will always have a breeze coming from behind or the side to take away the unpleasant odors. That's when you had sailing ships, okay, not the modern vessels that are propelled. The place where the sailors answered a call to nature was above the waterline and equipped with slats in the floor. Ways provided a flushing function, but this carried the inherent danger of being washed away with your poo. Time was everything. Nowadays, of course, we are all modern, and nautical toilets are just like those used by landlubbers. Most U-boats of the Second World War vintage were with heads that discharged into the sea, a function that only worked at sea level because of that pressure problem. Once submerged, the sailors had to use buckets. Sailors had to use buckets that could be emptied topside when surfaced. Ooh! The ventilation systems of U-boats were notoriously awful. So, but we don't need to get too graphic. By the middle of the war, the Allies had developed tactics that made U-boats at or near the surface sitting ducks. They were being sunk faster than the Germans could replace them. So the Germans engineers developed a toilet system that would enable the vessel to stay submerged longer. And I'm just going to skip the conclusion in the interest of time. So they made this high pressure toilet, and the captain of the submarine couldn't figure out, oh, I'm breaking up. Please let me know if I continue to break up, guys. Thank you. So sometimes when I take something off the, when I'm scrolling through the screen, it'll do that. Thank you, brother. So one time the captain of the ship didn't quite know how to use this fancy toilet, and it caused a big leak, and all that stuff was just splashing all around in the submarine, getting into the batteries and messing up the submarine. They had to surface, and they got shot at. They immediately surrendered the ship. And the ship, I think they got shot at, and they abandoned ship, and the submarine sank. So that's the story of the toilet that sunk a U-boat. I just thought that was really funny, guys. All right, so I'm going to close the window that might have been causing some of the distortion. So now we've done kind of the fun stuff, and I've given you, I put a list of the YouTube channels that I love to watch. And I like A.D. Robles. He talks about, that's a church channel that talks about culture. So on the Steve McRae show, one of them, he was saying there are no young Earth creation scientists. And Cindy Lincoln was very kind to alert me to the fact he said that. And this is not meant as a slight to Steve McRae. He's going to be the host of the show tomorrow. He's the owner of the channel anyway, and it's very gracious of him to invite me. He said very kind words about me. But I just have to offer a disagreement here. There are some very fine scientists that are young Earth creationists. One of them is John Gideon Hartnett. He invited me to be his PhD student in Australia. But as many of you know, I had to take care of my elderly and disabled mother. That just wasn't really any possibility, but I was deeply flattered. He has a Wikipedia entry. Let me just describe what this young Earth creationist does. John G. Hartnett is an Australian young Earth creationist and cosmologist. He's been active with Creation Ministries International and is known for his opposition to the Big Bang Theory and criticism of the dark matter and dark energy hypothesis. Okay, I have a suggestion here to take off the backup. I think, actually, Sandy, let me do this. I think it's the Wikipedia entry that's doing that. Is it better? Is the audio better, or am I still breaking up? All right, I'll just move on. Let me also, I'm going to remove the backup as Sandy suggested. We'll try it. See if it's better. Okay. Is everyone still here? Let me. Okay, I still have. You said it's better. Seems better. Yeah. Okay. Let me kill this banner. Don't need it. Everyone's seen it a bazillion times. maybe that'll improve. I want to thank the audience for their feedback here. It's great to see you, Sandy. This is going to be a nerd session. It was supposed to be with Emery Moyna, but he's trying to recover his voice. He was fighting the flu. So let me read about John Hartnett. He received his Bachelor of Science and PhD with distinction. Smart guy, from the School of Physics at the University of Western Australia. He currently works as a research fellow at the University of Adelaide, South Australia. He's published more than 200 papers in scientific journals. 200 papers in scientific journals, book chapters, and conference proceedings. Holds one patent. He works on the development of ultra-stable cryo-cooled sapphire oscillators and participated on the Sapphire Clock Ensemble project run by the European Space Agency. He has also written articles for several creationist journals, and according to Creation Ministries International, Hartnett believes that God is the real creator of the universe, as the Bible says. His research interests, and I recently announced I may be slowly transitioning out of biology work because my heart's really in physics, and people are like, no, Sal, and that means a lot to me. But let me show you what the excitement is in physics, because let me describe Dr. Hartnett's research interests. His research interests include ultra-low noise radar and ultra-high stability cryogenic microwave oscillators and clocks based on a pure single crystal sapphire resonators. Applications for the latter are to provide low noise local oscillators to atomic physics labs, time and frequency atomic fountain standards, and very high frequency, very long baseline interferometry radio astronomy. The terrestrial clock technology co-developed by him is claimed to be the most stable in the universe, with Hartnett et al. Stating that it outperformed the stability of signals generated by pulsars, rotating neutron stars that produce highly periodic bursts of radio waves, such as astronomical sources are used as natural clocks for tests of physics. Further on, he is interested in the development of cryo-cooled CSO resonators, detection of wisps using low-noise microwave techniques, tests of the fundamental theories of physics, such as special and general relativity, measurement of drift in fundamental constants and their cosmological implications, and cosmology, and the large-scale structure of the universe. Needless to say, this guy's very bright. He has gotten, probably in today's dollars, the equivalent of maybe $7-8 million in research grants. So when Steve McRae says there are no scientists that are young Earth creationists, I will port to John Hartnett. And in the video description, there's a list of even more. One of them I call the J group, because their names begin with the letter J. John C. Sanford, famous geneticist. A large fraction of the genetically improved organisms on the planet are through his gene gun process. And he was recognized for this stellar achievement by having his invention in the collection of the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. So we think of all the great things that have happened in American history. His invention's one of them. He is a young Earth creationist. And then someone said Raymond Damadian. Raymond Damadian, the MRI scanner. And many people have said he was denied the Nobel Prize. Even though the Nobel Prize was awarded for the MRI to other scientists, it's an evolutionist by the name of Michael Ruse said that was a travesty. He thought that was so egregious that even though Michael Ruse himself is an evolutionist, he thought that was not right to deny Raymond Damadian the Nobel Prize because he's instrumental in its development. So, and then I gave a list of so many more. There are, it may not be well known, but there are accredited universities. That is, they are they have standards that would be applied to secular schools in the teaching of science, but they're young earth creationist universities. The two off the top of my head that I know of are Liberty University, notwithstanding their problems with leadership and Jerry Falwell Jr. and Becky Bang Bang Falwell. The rest of the guys there are great guys. The biology faculty and the engineering faculty, lots of them are young earth creationists, and it's just fabulous. The other is Cedarville University. I don't think so. He's part of Biologos. He's been an active theistic evolution promoter. I think some people have speculated maybe inside he's starting to have doubts, which is good. So I'm not going to go through all that huge list of names. I'm just going to point out there are lots more of the young earth creationists are coming out of the closet. I think one that is of note, he's not a well-known name, but he's a NASA scientist. He studied special and general relativity. And he actually worked for NASA because of special and general relativity projects, but he's a young earth creationist. How can that be is an interesting story, but he has solutions where he's used general relativity to come up with a clever way that the universe could be young. And he's deeply respected by the mathematical intelligentsia and the young earth community. So the narrative that they're trying to describe us as being universally stupid is falling apart. Unfortunately, because of certain personalities that seem to command all the headlines and the debate stage, we do get a generally bad rap. Hang on, if you'll excuse me, I have to do some administrative stuff here. I just saw I have to moderate someone. I'm going to have to hide someone from the user channel. We're getting a little bit of a cyber attack here. So thank you. So there are people that are in the know who are young earth creationists. And then close behind that are old earth creationists. One of them was a Nobel Prize winner, Richard Smalley, in chemistry recently. He came out against Darwinian evolution. And also he was critical of the origin of life. There are people that are friendly to the ID movement or ID proponents. Sometimes it's hard to say. I put James Tour in that category. He does not accept that label, but he's very close. I think Marcus Eberlin, he's also a very senior chemist. He's had trained 200 PhD students. He came out on a tirade against evolutionary theory. So there are some top tier people that don't believe in evolution, and I think they're going to be more. The sentiment at the NIH is a lot of them believe that there's some sort of intelligent design. They may still accept common descent, but a lot of them who study the complexity of life are just like, yeah, you know, we're not going to say anything publicly, and it doesn't affect our research anyway, but privately, they don't think Darwinism is adequate. One of the NIH, National Institutes of Health postdocs, is a familiar name, Michael Behe. So that is a very, you know, the medical research field is a very nice place for creationist or ID friendly people to flourish, because you do get to see the complexity there. And I will say this, at the NIH they have a chapel where you can pray. Now, why would that be? A lot of people are going there and they're dying. Doctors have to deal with death. It's just a matter of courtesy to offer people an opportunity to find some consolation in praying to a higher power. And even though I strenuously disagree with a lot of what Francis Collins says as far as evolution, he's a professing Christian, and prayer is important to him. He saw someone dying. He was an atheist. He saw a woman dying while he was a medical student. And the way she died, he said that woman had something I could never give her. It must have come from above. And that was his road to Christianity. So I just figured I'd cover that, and I threw a lot of names up there. There are way many more, and I'm not trying to. I don't mean to offend anyone if I forgot. Goodness, I'm getting too many Joe Biden moments these days, and forgetting things. So I'm just going to throw this rhetorical question out for you, and it was inspired by Dr. Sandy Pigeon, our resident retired Navy SEAL, Commander Pigeon, sir. Why get in a karate fight with a Darwinist when you've got creationist Gatling guns on an A-10 or KC-130 gunship? I mean, when I see some of these creationists get in debates and arguments, they're fighting on the battlefield of the Darwinists and evolutionists choosing, and they're letting them define the argument. And I'm just like, guys, you've got all the heavy artillery you need, and you're going to be arguing about stuff that, in the scheme of things, isn't that important. So what do they argue over? They argue over the fossil record, the bird-dino transition, chimp-human evolution, Tiktaalik. I call that getting in a karate fight with them. When you have Gatling guns, and I would call the Gatling gun cell and protein evolution. So on this channel, in contrast to other creationist channels, you'll see a lot more emphasis on cell and protein evolution, because that's where it's really clear, really clear. So it's going to be a little hard. I'm going to take a risk here because I had some technical difficulties. I'm going to shut off my camera briefly, and I'm going to show these. I'm going to show some of the Wikipedia entries I was intending to. So let me shut off my camera, and then I'm going to just read the Wikipedia entries on signal peptides. Give me a moment here. So I'm going to show a eukaryotic cell, see if I can find a picture of it. And I'll monitor the chat to see if there are problems with the audio. And thank you guys for the feedback. That's not the best image. Let me try to grab another one. That looks just a little better. How about this one? No, that's blurry. We'll do this one. So we have the cell here. We have the cell here. This is a eukaryotic cell, and you can see all the little compartments and places. So in the nucleus, that's where the DNA is. And the DNA will have to exit the nucleus and then go into the ribosome somewhere around here. See if they even mention it. Yeah, it'd be around the endoplasmic reticulum. Oh yeah, here it is. Ribosomes are even mentioned here. So DNA comes out here, and that's where the factory, it takes the DNA and uses the DNA blueprint to make proteins. The proteins have to go to all these locations in the cell. Sometimes the protein has to go inside, go right back into the nucleus. Sometimes it has to get stitched into the cell membrane, or it could go into any of these organelles, even the mitochondrion. So even though the mitochondrion has DNA in it, 85% of the proteins it needs are from the nucleus here. It has to go out here, get converted, get translated to proteins, and then the proteins have to go there. So what does this imply? This means that there have to be some means of knowing, hey, it's like the postal system, so to speak. It's like this protein is this, it has to go there. And this protein is that, and it has to go over there. And the way this is done is these proteins have codes on them. We know a protein, like the average size of a protein is on the order of 400 or 500, like 430 or some amino acids. So just imagine a string of letters that's about 430 long. There's some that are much longer than that and some that are shorter. That's about the average size. Anywhere from 3 to 70 of those letters are kind of the postal address. And so how does this evolve? I mean, when they say, well, eukaryote evolved from a prokaryote, I'm just like, okay, you're going to have to take all of those proteins that were in the prokaryote, and then now you have all these new postal addresses that they have to go to. You have to put those postal addresses on all of the proteins. This is just a nightmare to evolve. And people ask me, why don't you believe in evolution? That's one of them. That's a Gatling gun. No one's been able to explain that. And I don't expect them to, because you can't select for what doesn't exist. And furthermore, if the intermediates are deadly, there's no natural selection to help you. So, if it is an essential protein that needs to get to the right location and it doesn't get there, too bad, it's dead. And I don't expect evolutionary biologists to be able to give an explanation for that any more than I would expect anyone to try to say you can build a 747 by passing a tornado through a junk car. It's just unreasonable to expect. As Frank Turek had said, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Sometimes this gets to be too unreasonable to believe it's anything but a miracle. So that was targeting peptides. I'm throwing that. I'm sorry I don't have all the snazzy videos to show how some of this works, because we might bog down the system, and I don't, I need to establish that I have copyright releases on some of these really great videos that will show the process of nuclear localization. So what do I mean by nuclear localization? That means when the protein is made here, it ends up going into the nucleus. So hence it's localized to the nucleus. And then we have the translocation process. So when it's made, it'll translocate either to the membranes and get stitched to the membranes or some of the other organelles here. And getting into the mitochondria is a whole nother thing, because the DNA has to go out of here, and there's a set of codes to get it outside of the nucleus, and what they call the poly A tails of the RNA. And then the RNA gets translated by the ribosomes. Oh, by the way, if I misstated that the DNA gets translated, it's the RNA transcripts of the DNA. Slight correction. So any of the Darwinists listening, I did misspeak, but I did correct myself. So the mRNA gets translated here, and then the protein will go all sorts of places. Like, let's say it has to go into the mitochondria, and there has to be another set of codes to allow it to get inside there. And if it has to be integrated into any of the membranes, there's another set of codes. So you have all these multiple, perhaps overlapping codes, not to mention it has to be functional. This is just too much to ask to believe it can be done by random mutation and natural selection. And as a matter of principle, I'll say it's just unreasonable. It is absolutely not an argument for ignorance. It is an argument by contradiction. Sometimes the creationists will not use the best choice of words when they say, I don't know how that could happen. That sounds like an argument for ignorance. Be assertive, guys. Be confident and say, it's unreasonable to expect that it will happen. By any law of physics, by any understanding of chemistry and cellular biology, it's just flat unreasonable. And what I often pose to these people that are diehards, I will ask them, what miracle would be enough? And some of them are honest and straightforward enough to say no miracle could be big enough that would make me believe. If you asked Matt Dillahunty if he saw a miracle, would he believe? He said, no, I think I won't exclude the possibility of space aliens. It's like, okay, have at it, Matt. Someone asked, you trust, there was a conversation here. Don't read the wiki entry on Stephen Meyer, it's baloney. And there's a conversation here. Okay, so some things on basic science, just like the targeting peptide, it's very ID friendly, but because it's just really just textbook stuff, I have no reason to think it's inaccurate. And then you can always double check if it has the references. Anything about the biography of creationists or ID proponents, you can expect it's going to be slanted. And one of the founders of Wikipedia was really upset with what's going on, that the Wikipedia contributors are just being really slanted about this. He said he's not a creationist by any stretch, but they're really giving slanted articles, and they're controlling the narrative on ID. So when Wikipedia asks for donations, I don't give it, because they need to do something about this. This is terrible. So let's see what else is on the docket. It would have been nice to have Emery here, because then we could just talk about all sorts of fun stuff. Let's see. So I talked about targeting, specific targeting of peptides. Let me see if I could find a graphic for post-translational modifications, or if I happen to have one. You'll need to give me a minute here. Usually at this point, this is when Emery would weigh in, and he'd give me a little bit of relief while I clicked around. And unfortunately, since he's not here, and I won't have that luxury, so I have to sort of see where I have to sort of wing it, which is kind of risky. Let me see if I can find a, let's see if I have it here. If I have one on post-trans, otherwise I'm just going to have to give it up. No, I'm going to go look to see if I can get something on the internet. That might be better. So apologies to the audience. But suffice to say, I'm just going to throw this out there. Oh, here's a good one. And this is actually relevant. A lot of people don't know this. This is a good, I found a good graphic. Hang on. Let me just see if I could show it now. So the protein has, well, you know, if you see this line, here and another line, that's part of the protein. But then chemical, there could kind of be like chemical post-it notes, so to speak, or little decorations like Christmas ornaments on a tree that can be put on the protein. I mean, this is figurative language. I'm describing it with figurative language just to try to, you know, try to describe what's going on. So if you just think of these little circles that are on the branch here, it's almost like a Christmas ornament, and we call those post-translational modifications. There's varieties of chemical modifications that can be put on the protein, so to speak, putting decorations on the Christmas tree. That's also a way that the protein can be used as like a memory device. And some analysis has been done on this, and it's like these are Turing complete computers. in like say the chromatin system in the eukaryotic nucleus. I mean, they're actually almost, it seems like, multiple overlapping computers, parallel processing. It's just nuts. And to implement this, I don't think I have time to go into it today. It might be a little bit much, but I'm just throwing that on the table. Maybe that's a subject for another show. If you want me to pursue that at some point in another talk, I can. So these are just some of the things that I've studied when I was at the graduate school at the NIH. And since Emery's not here, I'm probably not going to be able to talk much about promiscuous domains and the polycomb repression complex. So I'm just going to have to, well, maybe I can give you the polycomb repression complex. Give me a moment. So I'm going to look for the polycomb repression complex. It's a beautiful diagram, and it'll show you the complexity of what has to happen in the cell. Let's see if I can find a nice diagram of it. This was like one of my first classes at the NIH, and I was just wowed. I'll try to find a diagram that's reasonable here. Let me try this one. Oh, it's blurry. Let me look for another one. Apologies, guys. I wanted to do a PowerPoint. I just didn't have the time. I wasn't able to set aside time to get it done. I think this is. Okay, I'm just going to grab the most available one here. Okay, here it is. Here's one. Hopefully we'll have good enough video. Okay. This is a good one. Hang on. Let me just kill some of these extra windows so I don't overload my poor computer. Okay, so this over here is the polycomb repression complex 2. Yeah, PRC2, polycomb repression complex 2. Let me describe what you're looking at here. And let me remove my face so you could see this better. This wire here, you see this dark gray or black wire here? That's DNA. And the DNA wraps around these things called histones, and the histones have these tails. Remember I said the tail has like a Christmas ornament? So how's the Christmas ornament put on the branch, so to speak? It's by machines like this, the polycomb repression complex 2. And the polycomb repression complex 2 is made up of 5 proteins there. And you can see they have these very brief names: SUSY12, EED, EZH2, ASXL1, BAP. Yeah, okay, so it doesn't have the easiest names to remember. And what's not pictured here is the way that this is recruited and assembled is with a link RNA. So you have something going from, this might be like, say, chromosome 2 somewhere in chromosome 2. And this is the DNA. This is the DNA in chromosome 2. A link RNA is expressed from chromosome 12. It somehow navigates the chromosome 2. When it's here, I think it's transported by this SUSY12 bus. When it gets there, then all these machines will assemble, and then it's going to add the little ornament here. Why is that important? The quality of your skin on your eyes is different from that of the skin at the bottom of your feet, at the soles of your feet. It's different. That little switch, that little ornament, see if I could show it again. That little ornament, Christmas tree ornament on the tree, so to speak, tells the genes to regulate a certain way. And that's critical for changing the quality of skin. Just that little thing. It's going to go, so there are 3.3 billion base pairs on the human body. It's going to find that one location on the DNA, and it's going to find that one histone in that region, what we call the hot air, the PRC2 binding motif. It's going to find it. It's going to find it in that soup. It's going to pinpoint. It's going to go to one amino acid on one particular histone and modify it. It's that precise. And I don't think it has any active propulsion to navigate there either. How does it do that? Very interesting question in biophysics. But worse for the evolutionist, how does that evolve? Because there's any number of ways this could be a disaster if it's kind of half-baked. I mean, you know, what if the skin on the soles of your feet were the quality of this skin in your eye? Just, you know, you start to get all sorts of complications, and there are any number of things in the way that the human body develops. If these, say, Christmas ornaments are not in the right place at the right time, it's a disaster. I mean, the cell has to keep, you know, you think that the human develops for a single cell, that zygote, and it has to contain all this information. We don't know how to build anything that complex. And if our best scientists can't build it, why do you expect an undirected process could do it? It's just too hard to believe. So Sandy Pigeon said, is that ornament part of the gene regulatory system schema? Absolutely. So let me try to expand on this a little bit. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. So this is the DNA here. Now this is a histone protein here that you see it wraps around. So it's like a spool. Okay, so just like with wires, you would spool them up. To compact the DNA in a eukaryote, you take the eukaryotic DNA and wrap it around the spool. That makes sense. You can get it very compact and nicely organized. So the spool has the Christmas ornament on it. So going back to Sandy Pigeon's question, Commander Pigeon, sir, the spool has ornaments on it. So you have the DNA wraps around the spool to help keep the DNA organized. And the spool actually has what we call histone tails, where you can put these Christmas ornaments. The existence of that ornament will then regulate how this DNA is expressed. We don't completely know how it, you know, we're still figuring out how it actually does that. But we do know when we start to monkey with this, things go wrong in the expression. So my professor was a scientist who, that was his job, figuring out stuff like this. It's very difficult experiments to figure this out. Extremely difficult. Taking years to be able to isolate one Christmas ornament. And, you know, they had to develop all sorts of chemical techniques to discover this. Because you have billions, trillions of molecules in the cell, it has to find that one amino acid. It's like a needle in the haystack, and it finds it. To have biophysics that could track down a single molecule in that soup is just amazing. You know, this kind of random Brownian soup, for lack of a better term. Yeah, that's somewhat figurative. I'll just call it kind of a Brownian motion. It's not the most precise term, but I think most people understand what where I'm headed with that. it's going to sail the winds of Brownian motion and go from chromosome 12 and take that link RNA that's expressed from chromosome 12, sail the winds of Brownian motion, get to find a location on chromosome 2. It's going to find that particular spool on chromosome 2, and it's going to decorate the tail a very precise amino acid on a very specific histone tail, and it's one amino acid. It's going to find it. So you need this huge machinery here. It's going to locate and add that ornament. It's marvelous. And that's only one of these, what they call post-translational modifications. This is going on all the time, and it's going on in a lot of proteins. One protein that you've heard me talk about, because I've published on it, is the topoisomerase 2 alpha, which is a very important target for cancer chemotherapies. It has tons of post-translational modifications. That was my contribution to the publication, was to highlight all of these Christmas ornaments on the topoisomerase protein. So what distinguishes human beings, like say from a bacterium or a yeast, we are very much more complex, even at individual proteins, because our proteins have a lot more of these Christmas ornaments, and they're also being shuffled around depending on the cell type. So your eyes have different cell types, different kinds of cells than your bones, or your blood cells, or your kidney cells, or whatever thousands of other cell types there are. Each of the proteins are reconfigured with different Christmas ornaments. And when I showed this to Dr. Sanford, he was like, I want you on this full time. Because he was so wild. And I said, oh, Dr. Sanford, it wasn't my discovery. It's actually, this is like almost common news at the NIH, but it's not matriculating into the discussion, in the creation evolution discussion. That's, the creationists will just start getting in those karate fights that they're just not really qualified to fight. Why do you want to get involved talking to a dinosaur expert? Okay, you're not a paleontologist. And I'm suggesting you fight this fight on these terms, because you have textbook stuff, you have tons of complexity, and they have no way of digging this up in the fossil record. They have to give you a story. And, most of the time they'll just say, well, it just happened. I don't, natural selection or whatever. And you just know that they don't have a credible argument. So yes, our cells are nanofactories. Andrew Graham, thank you for joining us. And then we have Keith Colvin. Yeah, more like a needle in a hayfield. Yes. Yes. So I have to credit Commander Pigeon here. He's the one who gave me that idea. It's like, yeah, don't fight a karate fight when you have Gatling guns. Just doesn't make sense. Use your best weapons, guys. They want to draw you into a fight that they think they can win, and a lot of times they do, sadly, because I wouldn't win a fight with an evolutionist about dinosaurs. I don't know the first thing about dinosaurs. I don't want to waste my time on something like that. I mean, no disrespect to people who love dinosaurs, but all the action is in cell biology and protein biology. That's why this channel ends up being nerdy, but I'm trying to equip you guys. And I showed sometimes what you can do if you don't feel comfortable about this. We can make videos about them, but then now the Discovery Institute's making some videos to help us. And then there are educational tools out there where I've just shown like a 2-minute video on topoisomerase, and like Cindy Lincoln and Rebecca got it instantly. And I've told Rebecca, I said, has anyone challenged you on the evolution of this? Have they rebutted anything that I said regarding the topoisomerase? She said no. I said, see, it's easy. You can get to the graduate level very quickly now in biology in terms of the creation evolution controversy because of these animations and because of diagrams like this. You just need to know how to read them a little bit. But it's certainly easier than trying to dig through literature, trying to learn about birds and dinosaurs and Tiktaalik and all these things that the paleontologists know. I get so confused with all the names. I mean, there are all these terms and names for all these critters, and it's like, nah, you don't have to invest your time in that. All you have to do is fly the A-10 overhead. Bad guys run. Let me my focus kind of went out because I was laughing too hard. I messed up the camera. Oh boy. Let's see if I can. Okay, I got it reset. All right, so let's see what else is on the docket here. So thank you, Sandy, for that analogy. You're helping me understand what's going wrong with our ability to defend. And it's going to be easier to defend the intelligent design of life because of the animations. I mean, I can't emphasize how important this is, because like 10 years ago, you know, the professor would go there and say, okay, this is the topoisomerase, this is the ATPase domain, this is the, you know, this is the C-terminal domain, this is that, you know, and you don't grasp what's really happening. But when you see that visual of like this machine that goes and cuts the DNA and then it untangles it and reconnects it, you're just like, wow, that can evolve. And that's the right instinct. So let's see what's else on the docket. Okay, so I mentioned in brief this chirp-seek hot air thing. That was kind of the technology that was needed to uncoil all this. And how does it find, in part, this needle in a haystack? Well, there's a code. There is like a postal address. Just like we have postal addresses, it has to be a unique, relatively unique postal address right here in this location. It actually, there are postal addresses on the DNA that help you identify the right spool to go to. So there are two levels of postal addresses. We call it the hot air binding motif. So this link RNA called hot air rides the SUSY-12 bus here. When it arrives, and the SUSY-12 bus is going to go look for the address on the DNA. And then when the SUSY-12 is there and it finds the right address, somehow the other machines start to connect to it. And then it makes a bigger machine. And that bigger machine then will locate another address on the tail of the spool. And that's where it does the Christmas ornament. Okay, I'm just using figurative terms because I could use the technical terms and it may not be that meaningful. This is how complicated this is. And this is part of chromatin regulation. And I've told evolutionists, I said, okay, tell me how chromatin evolved when it didn't exist before. We have some, analogs in what we call archaea, but then we have it really well developed in eukaryotes. I said, tell me, how did that evolve when it didn't exist? What happens if you have this half-baked? Your DNA will not be accessible. You will not be able to replicate. You will not be able to transcribe and translate. The cell's going to be dead. You need all this machinery to be in place. And then I'll say, okay, describe then how you do DNA repair that involves machinery like I've just described. I have a funny anecdote. I showed a diagram that looked like this, very simple, with all these blobs and everything. And I showed the process of DNA repair, double-stranded break repair that involved all of these machineries where you just had these diagrams of blobs. I said, how did that evolve? I think they quit in 30 seconds, honestly. They saw that, they said, we're not going to argue with Sal. Debate was done in 30 seconds. That's the A-10 Gatling gun for you. Throw stuff like that on them, the debate shuts down. I threw stuff like that at James Dannard. I don't think he even realized I blew his head off, so to speak, in the debate. Just didn't know. He just kept talking. I was like, dude, did you even understand what I just said? You have no case. All right, so let's see what else is on the docket. So what I had done is, is all the biology stuff. Because I suspect, I was hoping Emery would join us. And then the next will be kind of more the relativity stuff, and that's going to be a real snoozer for most of you. But I said I wanted to do something about promiscuous domains in the CDART database. This is another problem for evolutionary biology. My professor at the NIH, he co-authored a paper with Eugene Koonin on promiscuous domains, and I'm going to try to find something that has promiscuous domains, try to illustrate the problem. I've had diagrams on this, and if you will permit me, I'm going to try to grab, see if I have it on my disk drive here. Oh my, I might actually have it. Let's see. Okay. Let's see if I have it. And I'll explain what a promiscuous domain is. Okay, so evolutionary biologists have a way of kind of using derogatory terms about God's creation, right? Because if a woman is promiscuous, that's not really a very flattering term, and we don't have very nice names for a promiscuous woman. I'm not going to use that word on air. I'm not going to use that word on air. Yeah, and Sandy does say, how does the DNA know to entangle the histone? We have what we call chromatin. We have other machines. Short answer, we have other machines to help untangle and to also move the histones around or disassemble them even. So there, some of those machines are called chromatin remodelers. And this is so complex, we don't know even, we've only scratched the surface of how all this happens. There's so much happening in the cell simultaneously that a lot of our cartoons are really actually too simplistic, where we just show a couple machines, but there's a host of other machines just floating around all the time. And let me see if I could find the promiscuous domain. Let's see if I can find it here. All right. Oh boy, I do have a cool diagram. I'm gonna digress a little bit because we're talking about Christmas ornaments. We can ornament the proteins, we can also ornament the DNA. And I want to show a picture of the DNA as the zygote develops into an embryo. And this is Christmas lights. I like this. This is even better. Someone asked, were those Sanford studies? It was financed by Dr. Sanford for me to go to the NIH to learn about it. Other people, I would classify it as irreducibly complex. I don't usually use that term because it's kind of become a term of abuse. And someone, Wesley will talk about that later. That's a whole nother topic. Not trying to brush you off. That's a great question. But yes, genetic entropy, mutations not being selected away. There's a video I did with Rebecca Davis that kind of gives a video that I gave a simplified version. You can look that up, and sometime we can talk about it. By the way, Wesley, if you ever want to be a guest host on my show, so you could ask questions like that, and I'll try to answer them, we can do that too. So let me try to explain what you're seeing here. This is a diagram of the zygote right after 3 hours after fertilization. And then this is it after 6 hours. So the lighting basically talks about, it's like Christmas lights. And so those are those chemical modifications on the DNA. So in proteins, we call them post-translational modifications. In DNA, we call them chromatin modifications. DNA there are terms for it, DNA modifications like methylation. So at 3 hours, so this is of a mouse zygote. So you have the DNA from the dad and the DNA from the mom, and you can see it's lit up that way at 3 hours. And then at 6 hours, they're still lit up that way. But then at 8 hours, the dad's DNA shuts off. The Christmas lights come off, and then they're able to, we don't have a good description. I don't have a timestamp for here, but you could see them starting to merge, and then they start to break apart and then rejoin. Just ignore this panel here. This is just a control. It's a little bit unfortunate that they put it right there in the middle because it's confusing. But then the cell splits, and you could see how the Christmas tree changes and the lights. And even with 4 cells, you get different patterns of this Christmas tree light. And I have even some better ones of this. So maybe I have to, at some point, if I revisit that, I can show even better diagrams than that. So you see, you have all this machine. The DNA is getting its switches flicked on and off. You had the proteins associated with the DNA with all the Christmas ornaments, and then all the proteins floating around in the cell, that's not close to the DNA. Those have all these Christmas ornaments, and they're constantly being flicked on and off, depending on what cell type. Like I said, your bone cells are different from your blood cells, different from the eye cells, the retinal cells, the nerve cells in your brain. All of them have all these configurations. All that information to do that was in that zygote. How we can compact that much information, something as complex as a human being, into a single cell is just amazing. You think of all the organ systems. We have like 100 trillion cells in our body. That's some tremendous accounting to do. So anyway, I was going to promiscuous domains. The reason I needed to do a little bit of a detour is I got the wrong presentation. That was from a presentation I gave to Christian faculty about the ENCODE project, and see if I could show what promiscuous domains are. So I might as well just give you is the audio reasonable right now, guys? Even though I've been using these PowerPoints. So I'm just going to give a little basics on proteins. Some of you have seen this, but I'll give you a little basics on proteins so you can understand promiscuous domains. So there is a beauty product that you can get at Walgreens. It's collagen. The collagen is a human protein. And about 30% of your protein weight is collagens of some sort. These letters you see here is the amino acids, is a listing of the amino acids in sequence for that protein, for one type of collagen type 1, alpha 1, we call the paralog. So this string is 1,464 amino acids long. Now there's a non-random pattern here. Some of you know what it is. At some point in this string, every third letter is a G for glycine. It's a glycine amino acid. It's a non-random pattern. Evolutionists will say that's really easy to evolve, and I can easily contest that. Don't need to go there. So you just have this, okay, so an idea of a motif is like an alternating, a G every other third. And then we have other proteins like the zinc finger. Let me see if I could show it. I cheated a little bit. Here's a zinc finger protein. And you can see it also has a non-random pattern. It has these C's here, the C for cysteine and the H for histidine. And they're positioned. You could tell this is not a random pattern here. That pattern is very important. These patterns that you're seeing are very important to the functioning of the protein. Now, there are not many proteins that you could do this with where you could see that non-random pattern. But that non-random pattern is very essential to the functioning of those proteins. And there are even more non-random patterns. And you can see like the collagen is very different from the zinc finger protein. So there's collagen on the left. This is a zinc finger protein on the right. And every protein has kind of its own chemical characteristics. So you could say, just like there are different architectures, like say a piano is not the same architecture as a car or as a helicopter, same way for proteins. Every protein has its kind of basic architecture, but there's variations within that architecture. You might say those are kind of micro evolutionary variations. And then major changes in architecture would be macroevolutionary. So evolutionists have conceded to macro evolve something like this to something like that, they don't buy it. Even that transition's too big for them. And they won't argue that these two came from a common ancestor. So that's very interesting. Even though they argue for universal common ancestry, there's no common descent of all genes / proteins from a common ancestor. And I said, see, you guys can start to disregard common ancestry. You don't really need it. And there's chemistry in this that we won't go into. But what I was trying to illustrate is you can see each line here, it has a characteristic sequence. And each line we call a motif or a domain. So even though each line is different, it has kind of a similar architecture. It's just like we could say a key has kind of a general architecture, but not every key is identical. But you can recognize it as a key. And so parts of the protein can be classified as domains. It'll have its own localized fold, and it has a certain characteristic, just like a key has a characteristic. For lack of better words, I'm just illustrating here, these are the little domains. The domains have a spelling of amino acids, and then it has a unique fold. So, okay, so those are domains. Now I'm going to show some pictures of domains. See if I could find, okay. And then we can break that protein up into other domains. You see this colored region, chemically speaking, it's kind of its own part. So when we have machines, machines have different parts. Well, when a protein is a machine or some other thing, like it might be structural, not really a machine, but a structural kind of protein, it'll still have parts that make it function. So in this case, you have this domain, it's a part of the protein, and then you have like these 13 domains here. Any questions? Let me look here. All right, so what do I mean by promiscuous domains? So one way to represent the zinc fingers, okay, so we have, let me see if I can show this. Remember, I just started diagramming this with just the letters, but now when I start to colorize it, you can kind of see the components. And there are ways to represent this where it's too complex to represent it like that. If you can look here, I'll just make the parts kind of in like little Legos. I don't have the right number of Legos, but to suffice to say, then I could make it, I could represent that protein like that. So you have the blobs that are the domains. Well, the problem for evolutionary biology is lots of proteins have different arrangements of domains. It's like, kind of like pieces of one protein / gene got transplanted in another. And here are some examples. Let's see if I have some that are really good. Yeah, see, like here's this scan protein, and it has some zinc fingers in it and crab. And it's just like taking Legos. Do I have a picture of the Legos? Yeah, here's another one. Here's another representation. And so my professor of evolutionary biology said this is a problem for common descent in proteins. It's like you have these proteins kind of stitched together from other proteins. They didn't descend directly. And it's like how he said it's an outstanding problem for evolutionary biology, and I was like, yeah, no duh, because it's like you have these very carefully cut and paste pieces. Because if you cut and paste, I mean, just think about it, just in terms of literature. If you cut and paste randomly pieces out of a book, you may not get a coherent book in the process. You know, if you're going to try to, like, say an essay and you're just randomly cut and pasting stuff, it's going to be a disaster. You want it to be coherent. So he noticed we had what's the equivalent of not just like little mutations, we have wholesale transplants of pieces that would have to happen. He said, how could that happen? Well, if you believe in a creator who has a mind, and he's just going to be like little, you know, the little kids taking Lego pieces, and the little kid will, see if I can, see the little kids can take these little discrete Lego pieces and put them in different orders. There is this conserved domain architectural retrieval tool. It's called the CDART database. You can see all sorts of this, and biology is replete with these promiscuous domains. And you just see diagrams like this, and it's like, how could that evolve? Emery would, if Emery were here, he'd really appreciate this. So Emery, if you're listening, thank you. I know you have, you're a little under the weather, so we may not be able to pursue that. But Emery, that was for you. That was for the nerds out there, guys. Sorry to put you, the rest of you, to sleep. That was definitely for the biology nerds. Oh, good point. You mostly get cancer and other diseases when you copy and paste at random. Absolutely. In fact, there are diseases that are implicated. Let me just show this diagram again. There are times when you get these domains, these little Lego pieces in the wrong spot in the DNA because it mutates in the cell. It's associated with cancer, definitely. But, you know, for a functioning human being, you're going to have, when it's in the right place, it works really, really well. Oh, and since Wesley's a musician, it's just like, maybe an even better analogy is cutting and pasting clips of music together, just randomly. It's not going to work and be anything coherent. So let me now see what else is on the docket. We're already at almost 2 hours. So as always, I'm saving the physics for the last, because I saved the last for worst, because that's usually when people are starting to bail out anyway. And then I could talk about topics that hardly anyone cares about. One thing that will make young Earth creationism viable, and I read a little bit about John Hartnett's history and his research interests. It's really exciting. You talk about cutting edge high tech, and you know, I guess some of you can sense that I get really irritated at evolutionary biology, where they advertise it as like some great scientific discipline, and I'm just like, no, guys, it's not even. It may not even qualify as good science, for one, and even if it did, it's certainly not at the top tier. When I was reading what John Hartnett, the physicist, when he's dealing with those sapphire clocks that are the most stable clocks, periodic phenomenon in the entire universe, that's what I call great science. The intellectual achievement to construct a physical device like that using the principles of physics, that you can measure important things about the physical universe with these tools, just amazing. And he's on the cutting edge. He's on the cutting edge of young Earth creationism and young Earth cosmology. That's what I'm excited about. And the thing about that that's exciting is young Earth creationists have to rely sometimes on like novel physics for some things. Okay, so the origin of life, the creation of life, will invoke a miracle. Uniformly, the young Earth creationists will just almost say life emerged by a miracle. It's not by any process that's naturalistic. In contrast, some of the problems with YEC, young Earth creationism, young cosmos creationism, requires naturalistic explanations. So like Noah's flood, we try to invoke naturalistic processes that created the flood. We try to, because we can reconstruct it then. Like, for example, we think the fossil record was laid down very quickly. Maybe a series of floods. Some people were thinking, well, maybe the geological column got formed all in one flood. And so, it's changing now. And that it might have been a kind of like one big flood and then kind of the kind of reaction type floods. I don't know all the most current models, but we're trying to reconstruct the flood using naturalistic processes. I will argue that Noah's Ark, since we accept that by faith, I think that had to actually be miraculously provided for. And some people pointed out, look at all the problems of just a few people managing a zoo of that size. And I'm like, yeah, you got a good point. Or how the Ark could survive such a, all the pounding of the storm without breaking apart. So that might be the one place I would definitely invoke a miracle. But the rest is naturalistic processes for Noah's flood. Likewise for the distant starlight problem, and then also for radiometric dating. There are some problems, some radiometric dates look anomalous, but we still have problems in the young Earth community accounting for like intermediate age isotopes and some other things, so like the rocks looking old. Some of these rocks looking billions of years old. Come now are these technologies that involve cold fusion and the ability to change nuclear structure and change isotopes with electrical and chemical means. This is slowly, and I emphasize the word slowly, becoming mainstream. I provided links in the video description to some of the stuff. The American Chemical Society had a meeting on cold fusion, and it drew a lot of attention for that. The United States Navy is interested in it. Their Space Warfare Systems unit is looking at cold fusion. So, as always, when there's an economic need, especially now for green energy and then for powering spacecraft, sometimes you're willing to take unconventional solutions that the mainstream has, has denigrated and says is crank science. But if there's a hint that it could be right, people will pursue it. Because, for like the Space Warfare Unit of the United States Navy, this is war. Doesn't matter what the mainstream says. And actually, if you discover something that the mainstream says shouldn't exist, all the better for you. All the better for your warfare unit, because then maybe you're counting on the enemy not developing it. So they had to do some clever funding allocations, let's say, in the Space Warfare Unit to fund some of the cold fusion research. And that was a big risk on their part, but then they reported positive results. And that brought them to the American Chemical Society, and they met some other people. And now there's competition for this. I provided links to this. And I was, the Professional Society for Electrical Engineers is the IEEE, Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. I was a member of that. I just stopped paying my dues, so I decided to no longer be a member of that prestigious organization. But they're a fine organization. I provided links to where one of the reporters is pointing out Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, the Japanese government, other agencies are now putting money into both cold fusion and then the ability to do nuclear transmutation with chemistry. There has to be a very rare set of circumstances where the chemical lattice can affect a nuclear reaction. And I'm pretty sure I provided, let me just double check. I provided a link to physicists that are exploring this. So just look. What that will mean is then we might have better explanations for some of the profiles of isotopes that have given some of the young Earth creationists some problems. The young Earth creationists have invoked accelerated nuclear decay, and there are a variety of accelerated nuclear decays scenarios, and I don't think they're going to work. This alternate avenue is exciting not just for the young Earth creationists, but if we could solve the problem of green energy, that's actually one reason I was both interested in this and also creationism, is there might be a means of creating green energy this way. I don't know. Additionally, there might be a way to remediate a lot of this nuclear waste. We might be able to put it through some of these chemical processes and change the isotopes and make more stable isotopes. And so some of that research was reported at the American Chemical Society, and there's continuing research that is kind of done still at the fringes of the mainstream, but it's in respectable laboratories. So some of these, in the IEEE article that I cited, this is happening at respectable universities now, the research. It's moving forward, and we're beginning to maybe understand the physics of why, what situations where low energy nuclear reactions can happen through chemical means. It's not completely well understood. It involves what they call the group 10, I believe it's the group 10 elements in the periodic table, and one of them is palladium. We don't quite know why palladium is so special. We just know that it is. So these low energy nuclear reactions then could give insights how it is that Noah's flood might be able to change nuclear structure if there was a lot of electricity involved in Noah's flood. Now, if you have one of these butane lighters that you click and it sparks, you just press the trigger and it sparks, I believe that is a piezoelectric effect where the quartz hits each other, you generate electric spark. On large scales, because the Earth's mantle has lots of quartz in it, when these things are colliding, they can generate enormous amounts of electricity. We have seen evidence of lightning bolts when there are earthquakes. So if there is even more gigantic tectonic activity at Noah's flood, generating large amounts of electricity, that might be enough to affect nuclear transmutation. And so this is really, we're still early in on this, but I think that's possible. One reason I believe that that is the correct scenario, most of the nuclear isotopes are on the continental shelf, are on top of the continents. It's not on the seafloor. How did we get all this nuclear stuff, all this radioactivity? Like, for example, there's 70 times more uranium on the continents than on the seafloor. Now, if uranium came from, like, say, the supernova or any aftermath, and then uranium was formed on the planet, one, uranium is dense. It might, in the elemental form, it might sink down lower. It shouldn't be on the surface. That's just kind of like Archimedes type principles there. So why is it on the continental shelf? And hydroplate theory does offer that a scenario where there's a lot of electricity being generated on the continents and then causing nuclear transmutation and the formation of uranium. So I'm just throwing this out there because this is stuff that they don't talk about in, like, say, among, the old Earth geologists. And this is a serious anomaly. I talked to an old Earther who was a geology student, and he said, yeah, we do have some really anomalous amounts of uranium on the continental shelf. And I was just like, yeah, that's going to be problematic. How did that, how do you get that kind of concentration? So we have all these clues. But beyond that, just the fact that we could start getting a new phase of physics that we call condensed matter nuclear reactions, it's going to be really exciting. We'll start to understand the atom and things. We may not need these huge colliders to be able to study the atom. It'd be nice if we could have smaller labs and we don't have to build these gigantic colliders. So on many levels, this is exciting. So when I made the announcement that I'm, at some point I want to phase out of biology, it's not because biology isn't exciting. There's exciting stuff in physics, just like no end. It's just like there are not enough hours in the day, not enough days in a lifetime to see all the wonders of creation. So let's see what else is on the docket. So I talked about cold fusion. I'm going to show a diagram of laser stars now. I'm going to show a diagram of laser stars. why is this significant? So let me just let me see if I can get the right. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Nice to see you. And Ben Rex. It's like 4 a.m. in the morning, brother. I'm flattered. Ben Rex is on the other side, almost on the other side of the world, and he's gracing us with his presence. This is so cool. So I'm very flattered, sir. Oh, he said, my bachelor's thesis, I worked with piezo crystals, but for pressure measurements within water tubes. Thank you. And Wesley points out, our models need serious work, but we don't have all the data yet. Yeah, and Sarah, thank you for the kind words. Yes, there's exciting times ahead, provided civilization doesn't fall apart from all that's going on. Okay, I'm going to show, I need to point something out. When oh, okay, so thank you. As I mentioned yesterday, when we have the police have their radar gun, you know, and they're measuring whether you're speeding or not, and they send a radar signal out, and it bounces off your car, and they can measure the, for lack of a better word, the Doppler shift. It's not exactly like the sonic Doppler shift, but it has to have some special relativity in the equation to help you. But they can estimate your speed, probably down to 1 mile per hour, 1 kilometer per hour, how fast you're going, because it is either red or blue shifted. So if you're moving away from the radar gun when they shoot it, the signal that bounces off your car and goes back to them is red shifted. So the red shift is real in that case, and it can be measured. And we can measure it because we know the frequency and, or equivalently the wavelength of the emission. The problem with measuring red shifts with stars is we actually don't know what the original frequency was when it was sent out. We have to kind of make some assumptions about the spectral lines of what they represent, and we're estimating the original frequency of the light. But we technically don't know. So when we say something is red shifted, we're making a little bit of a guess as to the original frequency of the light being emitted. If the star is generating light with maybe mechanisms we're not familiar with, we could be off by miles, so to speak, figuratively speaking. We could be off. We could be saying that this is red shifted when it's not. So now the red shifts that are that are part of the Big Bang model, it's not exactly Doppler. We call them cosmological red shifts. But I'm just, we don't absolutely know when something is red shifted unless we know the initial frequency of the stars. The only way we're going to know that is if we hypothetically had a space probe, which isn't going to happen anytime in our lifetime, because some of these stars are possibly millions of light years away, and we won't actually know how good the measurement is. But let me show you a spectral diagram of stars that are close, that are supposedly not redshifted, and then stars that are the quasars that are claimed to be redshifted. You're going to see something funny, and I gave the link in the description, and I'm just going to read here. He says, do redshifts really exist? This is by an astronomer in the secular world. This is not a young Earth creationist. He's a respected astronomer. Do the redshifts really exist? It is vital importance to examine whether this incontrovertible evidence in favor of redshifts, whether there is incontrovertible evidence in favor of redshifts. More specifically, We raised the question whether the numerical coincidences found between the ratios of wavelengths of lines observed in quasars and those of the wavelengths in the search list of lines are significantly more than would be expected from chance coincidences. We have carried out our investigation in the spirit of the paper, and they identify it, Russell and Bowen, 1929, to examine these questions. Quasars have Z, that's the redshift, of greater than quasars having Z, that is redshift, greater than 0.2 were considered. Computer experiments to simulate the spectra of two emission line quasars were made. About 80% of these nonsense spectra could be assigned reasonable redshifts. So they basically had a computer generate just garbage data. And then they put it through examination, and they said this garbage data is redshifted. I'm just pointing that out. You could take garbage data and say that it's redshifted. What does that say then about when we are assigning redshifts to various things that we see in the sky? So let's go back to the article. I'm not going to go into the details. You can look it up there, but I'm going to highlight. Let me see if I could show this a little more. And Dr. Varshny just threw out this rhetorical question. So we look at the stars and we look at their spectral profile, and you get lines. So each line here, each row represents a different star. And he said, just look at that. Can you tell what's redshifted or not? Because they all look alike. And so they'll say that this quasar down here is really redshifted, and yet they'll say this one's not. And yet they have kind of the same number of bars in the same position. It just looks really suspicious. And so I think he made a very good point that in some cases, things that we say are redshifted are not. And what does that mean? If we don't know the cause of the redshifts for everything, the Big Bang model could be totally bogus. And there are more and more papers that are saying the Big Bang model is in deep trouble because things just are not agreeing. Now, in the case of the quasars, it could be that the plasmas are creating very powerful spectral, like when you have a laser beam, it's in one frequency. And there could be all sorts of multiple laser effects that are making the quasars look redshifted. And there's something else like they all seem to have they all cluster around the same redshift, which means it's quantized, which doesn't look right. So they're also, I'm just throwing this out there. There's stuff in the mainstream that is defended, and people have noticed this, that, people who've invested money and reputations and got government grants and they tell a narrative, it's very difficult to say we were wrong because you're going to get cut off from grants and your reputation is trashed. You may have worked on the Big Bang model for 50 years and then you find out, oh, it's falling apart now. Was I just sympathetic to this because I'm a young Earth creationist? Well, I don't know. I guess maybe. But there are professors of physics and astronomy at my undergrad at George Mason that were very skeptical of the Big Bang, and that had influence on me. Even one who was a Big Bang advocate said, maybe 50 years from now we'll realize we were all wrong. And that was Dr. James Trefil. And then there were three other professors very forcefully said they think the Big Bang is wrong. And all the money is being sent to kind of perpetuate a dying paradigm, just kind of like evolutionary theory, so to speak. So I'm just, I'm giving you a little different perspective for those that are curious why me, a physics student, became a young Earth creationist. And I actually became a young Earth creationist more so because I was kind of like on the fence until I went to graduate school and started studying physics. And then when I learned what the mainstream cosmology was, I was like, young Earth creation is no more outrageous than some of the components of the Big Bang theory, like inflation and dark matter. And so it's like, it's a level playing field now. Some Big Bang cosmologies even invoke variable speed of light. Variable speed of light. So that's mainstream. It's okay to say that. You have Lisa Randall at Harvard who came up with a variable speed of light theory, and numerous other people. Oh, that's okay. But when a young Earth creationist proposes that, puts it on the table, it's like, that's crank science. See, that's how the game is played, all right? But I saw that's the game that was being played, and I said, no, you know, if they're, that's just playing games. If it weren't young Earth creationism, it might actually be a viable theory of variable speed of light. Now, there are other kinds of things like one-way speed of light, etc. And there are all these models in the creationist community, the young cosmos, young Earth creationist community, how light, distant starlight could arrive, you know, within 6,000 years. I'm in the variable speed of light camp. And so let me cover just a little bit. Let me look at what's on the docket, and I'll just try to be quick with this. Let me just, you know, maybe cover, the thumbnail was, let me cover about some of the experiments that talked about the constancy of the speed of light and the ether. There's the famous Michelson-Morley experiment, and there are other interferometers that were built, and they said it confirmed the absence of the ether. We weren't able to detect it. It confirmed certain aspects of one form of, there are two competing forms of relativity, one of Einstein, one of Lorentz. And let me point out who Lorentz was. I think I have a picture of him. So let me just get rid of a PowerPoint here. Okay, and I'm going to show Lorentz. Picture of Lorentz. You can see Albert Einstein here. He's in the center. There is Konrad Lorenz right here. And there's some very fine, they're just, all the greats are here. I wish I knew off the top of my head who's who, because these are the founders of modern physics. And there's Madame Curie here. But Lorentz is very important to relativity. When I studied both special and general relativity, when they talked about things like the flow of time being different depending on your speed, it's called the Lorentz transformation. And you're like, why is it called Lorentz? It's because he's the one that actually discovered that before Einstein. Now, the implications were pretty big, but Einstein got a lot of the credit for special relativity. But when you actually study special relativity in school, they'll say that the equation, a lot of the equations that describe special relativity are called the Lorentz transformations, where you have Lorentz factors. It's because it came from Lorentz. So it's kind of an interesting historical question why Lorentz didn't get more credit. So for special relativity, because the special relativity transformation bears his name. And so the Michelson-Morley experiment, there were kind of two formulations of relativity, one that involved the ether and one that didn't. So it wasn't so much that they were saying, it wasn't so much that they were proving relativity true, it was which formulation. One of them involved the ether. Okay, that's my best understanding. Some of the aficionados out there probably could find the nuances to that. But the whole thing about the ether is then there's going to be an absolute, kind of like an absolute, you can concoct an, you know, you can conceptualize an absolute reference point. And it's actually, as I studied this question, and I'll show you kind of the math that I had to go through. I had to go, we had Maxwell's equations of electrodynamics. So electrical engineers, when we're like building machines that make radio waves, and we also try to understand optics and electricity and how to generate it. You know, generators are driven by Faraday's law of induction. When you take a wire and move it through a magnetic field, you create a potential difference. That's really important. You know, where would we be without electricity? But then Maxwell and others realized, hey, you know, we can also changing electric fields and magnetic fields. A changing electric field makes a changing magnetic field, and vice versa. And you can get these what they call transverse undulations. Turned out those were radio waves, but then that would also explain optical light, etc. So he was able to, the Maxwell's equations were able to unify optics and electricity and magnetism. So when they say electromagnetic wave, it's really amazing. When you see light, it is also, it has components of electric fields and magnetic fields in it. Really amazing. And then you add quantum mechanics there, where you can also describe light as photons. So this equation here, I don't know if I had Maxwell's equations earlier. You could start from Maxwell's equations. See if I have it somewhere. Well, I showed it. You can look up what Maxwell's equations look like, the partial differential equations, and then you can create solutions to the partial differential equations and create what they call the electromagnetic wave equation, which is a solution to those equations, and that describes light. And then you can realize that whatever speed you are, you will measure the speed of light the same. And that's with the Lorentz transformation. So when I was in graduate school, my very first day, I had to take the, let's see, I had to, sorry. My first day at Johns Hopkins, the assignment was, and we got some help from the professor, because no way we could do this from the start. We started with the electromagnetic field. You know, we started with this equation, and I'm just going through this. I'm showing you life as a grad student, and as a creationist grad student. We had to go through this derivation. Let's see. I'll show you the derivation. First day of graduate school. We took the electromagnetic equation, and then we applied what we call Laplacian, and we got these monstrosities. It took me 4 hours. He said, demonstrate the Lorentz transformation is invariant or something like that. And I had to work through all this. So let me just show it to you here. I have to go back in my notes. It's been a long time. So what this shows is that we can take the basic equations of electricity and magnetism, we call Maxwell's equations. We can relate it to light or radar waves or whatever, radio waves. We can also, and this results in the fact that time flows differently depending on how fast you go. It's just, it's almost like voodoo. And so this is kind of the mathematical, machinery needed to demonstrate that. And it's consistent with predictions. And there were experiments where we took atomic clocks up into the airplanes, and we were able to prove that we can make either time change or the clocks slow down or speed up. So there are two explanations, and here's the experiment. That's the Heffel-Keating experiment right there. Yep, here you go in Benrex. Yeah, I know, agony. So these here, they're here on an airplane, and they have these two precise clocks. And what they did is they had another airplane with also these clocks, copies of the clocks, equivalent clocks, and they flew the airplanes in different directions, and they noticed that each of the clocks ticked differently when the airplanes landed. So there are two explanations for this. One sounds kind of like fancy and just kind of marvelous, but I think it's the wrong explanation, but it's the one that's taught in textbooks. They're saying time flows differently depending on the speed. The other interpretation is that when you're going fast, it affects how fast your clocks move. Time actually ticks, is absolute across the universe, but your clocks can either slow down or speed up. And there is, you can Google this. Let me see, why don't I just try to Google it right now? So Wikipedia entry called The Problem of Time. And let me just show you that I'm not making this up. In theoretical physics, the problem of time is a conceptual conflict between general relativity and quantum mechanics. In that quantum mechanics regards the flow of time as universal and absolute, whereas general relativity regards the flow of time as malleable and relative. So when I talk about an ether and the idea of an absolute clock for the entire universe, I'm not on really tremendously shaky ground because quantum mechanics prefers that. And that's one of the conflicts between general relativity and quantum mechanics. So what do we do? Is general relativity wrong? It's like, well, you know, like a lot of things, it may not be totally wrong. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There might be a conceptualization change. And more importantly, do we have experiments? Do we have experiments that show that the amendments are correct? And so I showed that picture of Einstein and Lorentz. So we have Einstein and Lorentz. There's Lorentz right here. They have different conceptions of relativity. And as I said, Lorentz was really the pioneer of the change in clock speeds. Okay, so I would think Lorentz would be leaning toward the idea of the clock speeds being different versus Einstein saying time flows differently. So I think Lorentz, if that's the case, and the science historians would know this better, Lorentz was probably closer to something that's more friendly to quantum mechanics. So I'm just throwing this out, and that's why I showed you that Wikipedia entry, that just to show I'm not that far out to the left field by saying there has to be an absolute universal clock. That means there are preferred frames and everything is not ultimately relative to everything else. There's some absolute reference point. So where was I going with that? We may, if there's absolute reference points, we may have the chance of detecting that ether and detect absolute motion. And I could go through those equations that I showed earlier, and as I agonized over them and pondered them, let me see, again, as I was looking, okay, so I looked at the Lorentz transformation, but then I looked at how it's derived from electromagnetic theory. You can derive, you can demonstrate, you can derive the Lorentz transformation by studying Maxwell's equations. And I did not, this is not original to me. The professor gave pointers, but it still took me 4 hours to solve this, to demonstrate it. You have to use the chain rule of second semester calculus to do this. It's not quite as bad as it looks. You just have to get through all the symbology. And it was just kind of like a cool exercise, honestly. Just kind of, I think he was just trying to make us all feel smart because we're going to get beaten down the rest of graduate school. But it's really more or less a lot of accounting of all the little pieces and all the terms. There are other parts of physics math that were just horrendously grueling. And, you know, that problem only took me 4 hours to solve. There have been problems I've worked on for days or a couple of weeks, and it was still wrong. Then the professor, no one in the class would get it right, and so he can't flunk us all out. So as I studied that equation, I said, oh my goodness, am I out to left field to think that you can there has to be kind of an absolute reference point, because it actually suggests it in that equation. If anyone wants to have a civil conversation about that, I would welcome it, because in that Haffel-Keating experiment, it would seem that, you know, when one airplane went one way and the other went the other, one of them had a faster clock than the other, and it's like, well, it seems to know what direction you're going. So I'm just throwing that out there, guys, that when I looked at this, I said, you know, there's like an absolute zero velocity. You have to. You know, when we calculate velocity, one way to express it is the integral of acceleration. You know, it's a dt, the integral of a dt from, you know, the start to stop. You integrate the acceleration over time, you get velocity. And as I worked through this, I said, you have to have an absolute velocity. I mean, you can't just keep integrating the acceleration and not, you know, one way or the other, and not get to zero velocity at some point. And you can see that in Lorentz equations. I'm sorry I'm getting so technical, but what's the bottom line in all of this? Do we have experiments? And that's the next part. Cahill, let's see. He had all these experiments. He lists all these experiments that, if you look at them, they actually may have detected the ether, all the way beginning with the Michelson-Morley experiment that happened to have air. The remaining Michelson-Morley experiments had vacuum, but they're able to detect the ether when they had air. And so we began to realize, when you have a refracted medium or a dielectric, you know, a non-vacuum dielectric, that's what you need. That's the key. And so let me just show you this paper a little bit here. And it goes over the original Michelson-Morley experiment, the interferometer, and it goes through, it revisits this and says, okay, when it had air, you actually did detect the motion, and he demonstrates that. And then he goes into some other experiments by Roland DeWitt, the Miller interferometer that also had air, and a whole bunch of other experiments. And there have been other people that are, oh, this is a real good one here. Yeah, that was by DeWitt. So so I put those in the links. You can read them. And, you know, at this point when I read this, I had already had classes in special and general relativity and cosmology, plasma physics, astrophysics, quantum mechanics. And I couldn't put this down. It was so good reading Cahill stuff. Cahill built several other experiments, including a laser interferometer, which I tried to reconstruct based on his materials and methods. I got inconclusive results. I wrote him, and he said, try this other experiment, but I would need a $500,000 oscilloscope to do it. And if someone is going to grant me, you know, you don't usually buy one. What you do is you rent time to get one of these really high-end oscilloscopes. There's some that are like 15,000, and I'm like, no, you know, until I learn this more, I'm not going to venture in there. And so there's some people very sympathetic. So where is this going? If we can detect the ether, and also if there are variations in the ether, and I've actually looked at this possibility, if there are variations in the ether over space, then light can travel very, very fast. And we don't have to assume that it is restricted to the 186,282 miles per second, or whatever, 3 times 10 to the 8th kilometers per second. You might have regions in the universe light can travel very, very fast. And this would be exciting physics. Everyone's excited for new exciting physics. It would have implications for a lot of things. And as I mentioned in the last 2 days, one thing that really got me is the GPS works because of the Hatch filter. It was authored by Ron Hatch, who doesn't believe in Einsteinian general relativity. He believes in Lorentzian, neo-Lorentzian relativity. So when they say relativity, GPS works because of Einsteinian relativity, you got someone in Ron Hatch who actually makes the GPS work who would disagree with that statement. Your GPS works today because of his filter that's in the GPS satellites and in your devices, and he rejects Einstein's formulation. It's too bad that Ron Hatch passed away. John Sanford tried to put me in touch with him because he's a friend of John Sanford, who was my boss in biology. So John, everyone on the planet seems to know who John Sanford is, if they're a scientist. And it's just kind of wonderful because he just puts me in contact with all these people. So I put the links in the video description for all of this, and to some of the stuff with low energy nuclear reactions and stuff. There is, I don't know if I put it there, the conspiracy of light. If I didn't, I may modify it. But there's experiments in transmutation there are listed. We won't have to go in detail. But there's a conspiracy of light website. They're definitely not ID proponents. I think they're very atheistic. They don't like idea creationism. But they have a dissenting, like me, they have a dissenting view from the mainstream about general relativity and the nature and velocity of light. And they cite a lot of experiments that people don't even know about. They cited experiments like something with Fresnel drag. It was really an interesting experiment where they had water flowing. Let me see if I had the Fresnel experiment, if I could find it. Fresnel. See if I could find it. I mean, there is this. It involved flowing water. Physio experiment. Oh my goodness, the physio experiment. I did not know about this when I was taking graduate. Let me show you the picture of it. The physio experiment was carried out by Physio, I can't pronounce this, Hippolyte Physio in 1851 to measure the relative speeds of light in moving water. Physio used a special interferometer arrangement to measure the effect of the movement of a medium upon the speed of light. So, oh, Happy New Year, Cheryl. Greetings. In the Conspiracy of Light website, they point out, and much love and prayers to you, Cheryl. I heard the call was given out to pray for your health, and you've been on my heart, as many of the people here in our community. But going back to this, in the Conspiracy of Light website, you'll see a different interpretation of the physio experiment that will argue in favor of the ether, and I found it a very compelling explanation. And as I said, as I thought about the fact that quantum mechanics wants an absolute reference frame, I think we have much more going for us. There's just kind of all this, the momentum of Einstein, because he's so respected and he was brilliant. But Lorentz is also a giant, and relativity, I think, in many respects, really began with him and with Fitzgerald. They call the transformation the Lorentz-Fitzgerald transformation. That's another term for it. And so I think the case for young Earth creationism and the distant starlight problem, I don't think we're written off by any means. This is all to point out there's much about this that is still probably subject to debate, and kind of like academia, they do have a lot of resistance to change, and that's okay. That's just the way it is when an idea is going to get overturned. So this is kind of my way of just telling the world, if they ask why I'm a young Earth creationist, I say I don't have as much data as I'd like. I'd like the distant starlight problem to be solved. I'd like some things about radiation to be solved, but there are a lot of anomalies for the old fossil record, for the old universe, that are substantial enough that I'm going to throw myself in the young Earth camp. What do I have to lose? What if we find out the universe is old? Is that going to destroy my belief in a creator? When we've gone through a lot of biology stuff, the creator's there. I also think there's very good evidence that humanity's young, because our genomes are degenerating very fast. We could not have been here for very long. So we might not be able to get, the creationists understandably are eager to prove their case right today. I think we can prove a lot of the parts of the case, not all of it. And that's where I am. And I think we're on a good foundation, because it's very evident to me that there's a creator. Evolutionary theory doesn't work. Abiogenesis theory has failed unequivocally. And there are levels of design, as we covered today, with targeting peptides and post-translational modifications, chromatin modifications, et cetera, promiscuous domains. I mean, there's just no way that the other side can win. To argue that evolutionary theory is correct when you actually look at the cellular level. And then I think there's good evidence humanity's young, and therefore affirms the genealogy of Jesus Christ. The literal interpretation of the genealogy of Christ. So there are some kind of unfortunate, some difficult loose ends to tie, like with radiation, radioisotopes, and then the distant starlight problem. But I'm hopeful, because the longer I've been studying this, the more that when a door seems closed, it just starts to creak open a little bit, and a little bit more each year. So I think it's an exciting time to be a young Earth creationist. With that, I think it's time to say goodbye, and I've been talking almost nonstop for almost 3 hours. And Ben Rex says he has to go. Thank you for dropping in. Thank you for dropping in, Wesley Coleman and Cheryl. I'm so glad to see you again, and I hope you're well. I have to, unfortunately, now I think we're under a cyber attack, and I have to get, thank you, Cheryl, for getting rid of that. God bless you all. And till we meet again, as I said, I'm going to be on the NonSequitur show. The time is still kind of a little bit in flux. I am scheduled, even though you won't see my name on there. I provided a link in the video description, so we'll see if I do end up getting, if I'm confirmed to be a guest to comment about teaching young Earth creationism to children. And then, so that's tomorrow. And then on Tuesday, the next day, I'll be at the Ask Me Anything with Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, professor of evolutionary biology. So with that, it's been great hanging out with you all. Take care, and the Lord be with you. Good night.